Frank's eyes fluttered open, his head throbbing in pain. Darkness surrounded him, save for the flickering streetlights outside. He was hanging upside down, still strapped into the driver's seat. The car was overturned, metal twisted, windshield shattered. Blood trickled down his forehead. His breath came in ragged gasps as he tried to piece together what had happened. Then it hit him. Sarah. Panic surged through him. His daughter wasn't in the car. His fingers fumbled with the seatbelt, trying to unbuckle it, but the damn thing was jammed. He twisted and pulled, his hands shaking, but it wouldn't budge. A shadow loomed outside the car. Frank froze. Through the fractured glass, he saw a figure stumble forward, its movements slow, unnatural. The thing's lifeless eyes darted in different directions, its mouth slack with bloodied teeth. A zombie. Frank's chest tightened. He reached for his pocket knife, fumbling to flick it open. With one sharp motion, he slashed through the seatbelt. The moment he fell, the sound alerted the undead. It turned sharply, groaning as it smacked against the car door, its decayed hands clawing at the broken window. Frank scrambled backward, his heart pounding. The zombie pushed harder, snarling, forcing its rotting hand inside. Frank gritted his teeth and swung his knife, jamming it into the creature's throat. It gurgled and fell still, its lifeless body slumping against the car. Breathing heavily, Frank yanked the knife free. He had to find Sarah. Frank climbed out of the car, wincing as pain shot through his leg. The street was eerily quiet, abandoned vehicles lining the road, their doors flung open as if people had fled in a panic. Buildings stood in eerie silence, their windows shattered, their signs swaying in the wind. "It's too quiet," he muttered. He needed to get off the open street. He spotted a small bakery across the road and made his way toward it. The door was locked. Frustrated, he picked up a rock and slammed it against the glass. The window shattered, echoing through the empty streets. Frank stepped inside cautiously. The scent of decay mixed with stale bread filled the air. Shelves were overturned, pastries left to mold. His eyes scanned the floor, and then he saw it. A soldier's body sprawled out, his gun lying just inches from his outstretched fingers. Frank bent down to pick it up when the soldier's fingers twitched. "Shit," Frank whispered, pulling back. The soldier's head snapped up, his eyes lifeless, his jaw unhinged. In an instant, he lunged at Frank. Frank gritted his teeth, raised the gun, and fired. The shot echoed, the undead soldier slumping to the floor, a hole clean through his forehead. Frank stood over the body, his breath coming fast. He had to move. He had just rung the dinner bell. Ducking into a nearby restaurant, Frank pressed himself against the wall, peering through the window. A dozen zombies now stumbled into the bakery, drawn by the gunshot. He turned, scanning the dimly lit interior of the restaurant. His stomach twisted in hunger, and he began searching through cabinets. After minutes of searching, he found a can of beans. He shoved the cold food into his mouth, desperate for energy. Then he saw it, a small pink backpack lying on one of the booths. Frank's heart nearly stopped. He rushed forward, picking it up. The zipper was half open, revealing a stuffed rabbit peeking out. "Sarah's backpack," he whispered, his throat tightening. She had been here. "Where are you, Sarah?" he muttered, clenching the bag to his chest. Frank moved quickly, exiting the restaurant and slipping into an old cinema. The building was dark, the seats empty. The air smelled of dust and mildew. Then he heard it, a muffled scream. His stomach lurched. "Sarah," he breathed. He followed the sound to a basement door. It was partially open, the light flickering. He heard snarling. 5 zombies clawed at a locked door at the end of the hallway, their rotten bodies pressing against the wooden barrier. Frank didn't hesitate. He raised his gun and fired. The first zombie collapsed, then the second. He kept firing until the hallway was silent. "Sarah, it's me," Frank called. The door creaked open. A small figure emerged, tears streaming down her face. "Daddy!" she cried, throwing herself into his arms. Frank held her tight, his throat constricting. "I'm here, baby. I've got you." "We have to move," Frank whispered. He could already hear the distant roars of the undead closing in. Stepping outside the cinema, they crouched behind an abandoned car. In the distance, zombies shuffled aimlessly, but the growing moans meant more were coming. Frank's eyes darted around, searching for an escape route. Then he spotted an ambulance parked a block away. "That ambulance. If we can get it started, we can get out of here," Frank said. Sarah nodded, gripping his hand tightly. They moved cautiously, ducking behind cars, staying in the shadows. Frank tried the ambulance doors, locked. "We need the keys." A small hospital stood nearby. It was their only option. The glass doors were shattered, blood smeared across the tiled floor. They stepped inside, Frank holding his knife in a tight grip. A loud clang echoed through the hallway. Frank spun around, heart pounding. A zombie stumbled from behind a desk, its mouth hanging open in a grotesque grin. More figures emerged from the dark corridors. Frank shoved Sarah behind him. He swung his knife, burying it into the skull of the first one. He turned, kicking another into a cart of medical supplies. More were coming. He grabbed Sarah's hand and sprinted toward the reception desk. A key ring gleamed on the counter. He snatched it just as a zombie grabbed his wrist. With a grunt, he slammed the creature's head into the desk before stabbing it through the temple. Breathing heavily, he turned to Sarah. "Run!" Frank and Sarah bolted out of the hospital, zombies pouring out behind them. He fumbled with the keys, jamming one into the ambulance's lock. The doors swung open and they climbed inside. The engine roared to life. Frank gripped the wheel and floored the gas, the ambulance plowing through the horde. Bodies tumbled, but some clung to the sides, clawing at the windows. Frank swerved hard, sending them flying. They drove for hours, the city fading behind them. Then, finally, on the horizon, they saw it. A military base. Survivors moved behind its fortified gates. Sarah gasped. "We made it!" Frank exhaled. He reached for his daughter's hand. "Yeah, we did." They had survived, but the world wasn't safe yet, and their fight was far from over.